Welcome to the third episode of my podcast, COVID-19 Surviving Isolation. My name is Paul Thorne. This week I want to talk to you about the choices we make and why it's important to make the right ones whilst we're self-isolating. And really the question is, who do I choose to be during the COVID-19 crisis? Mindset is important, and I want to also talk about the opportunities for positive change that there is and exists right now. This time that we spend in self-isolation can really be used to our advantage if we choose to. So I just want to ask you a few questions about how you've been dealing with things. I mean, have you been searching and sharing everything that you can find online about COVID-19? Have you been panic buying toilet rolls and food and medicines that you don't need? Have you been looking for somebody to blame? In other words, have you been acting a bit of a victim? This is controversial, I know. I wrote about this in a book called HIV Happy, and it didn't win me any fans. But it's true, and our mindset is very, very important. Everybody at some time or other wants change in their life. For example, what we do for a living, the place where we work, where we live, how we live. It could be the things that we could spend our money on, the exercise that we do, or in my case really should do. It could even be about the friends we keep and the people we associate with. It could even be the relationship that we're in. Changing our life can be achieved if we put the effort in, but it does take time, sometimes longer than we're prepared to wait, and it may just all seem too easy to stay with what is familiar and to settle for second best, especially if the reason for wanting change is because we're just simply tired of life in the first place. And I can understand with COVID-19 at the moment that a lot of people are getting very, very tired of this already. But, you know, I urge you to choose to look for the opportunities out there, you know, to accept that everybody is trying to do their best in this situation. Over the next few podcasts, I'm going to talk about practical things that you can do to create the right environment for change. More importantly, the right mindset to be able to accept opportunities for change as they present themselves. So this is a methodology that I've developed over the years and I've applied to myself whenever I've wanted to change things in my life. You might be asking yourself, does this work? I can assure you that for me it has. Let me tell you a little bit about where I was and where I am now. I haven't always been this particular Paul Thorne. Indeed, when I look back on my life today, it feels as if I'm looking back on somebody else's life. Without going into all the gory details, you know, I came from a very disadvantaged background. Yes, there was abuse, mental, physical, even sexual. I was thrown out of home by my mother and stepfather a week after my 17th birthday, and I moved from the small town where I'd grown up to London with just a couple of carrier bags, really. Life was hard, and after 2 years I found myself living in a derelict house. I had no front door, no roof. I was so scared. No more so than when I found out that I was also HIV positive in 1990. My life really felt as if it was already over by the time I was 20 years old. Thereafter I spent a few years swimming around in a sea of drink and drugs, really. And in 1995, if you've been listening to the other podcast, you'll know that I was admitted to hospital because I'd contracted a drug-resistant strain of tuberculosis. Was not expected to survive, and I spent 3 months in negative pressure isolation. But that was a really positive thing that happened to me. For all intents and purposes, the person that I was died in that room. Why is this? Because I made the choice that this wasn't the life that I'd imagined or wanted for myself, and I chose to change it. I chose, essentially, to reinvent my life. The bottom line was I had nothing to lose anymore. Now, I understand, you know, my situation in the isolation room was very different to the ones that people find themselves in whilst they're self-isolating at home. But the premise is the same. There's a real opportunity here to examine our lives and have a think about what we really want and make that choice to change. Fast forward to today, I've written several books. They've been published in good old-fashioned print, as ebooks, even as audiobooks. And I've travelled the world working as a freelance consultant in advocacy and communication. I live in a nice home by the sea. I overlook the beach. more than that, I have my health back. I've reinvented myself. I've come a long way since that scared, frightened 20-year-old living in a house with no roof and no front door. Today, I'm more like the person that I used to imagine as a child I would eventually become. So, how do we start to take control, and how do we start to create change? It's quite simply by making a conscious choice to change and then putting in the action to instigate that change. And we need to personally take responsibility for the change and for the choices that we make. We need to also take responsibility for where we are in our lives right now. A few words about playing the victim role. Yes, this is something that some of us choose to be. I've done it myself, but let me explain from my own perspective. For most of my life, I thought wrongly that I was a victim of circumstance. I thought I was a victim of chance and bad luck, of misfortune and of other people. And for years I took no responsibility for what happened, and it never occurred to me that I'd made many choices along the way. And it's true that some of the things that have moulded me into the person that I am today are the result of other people's choices, such as my parents, my classmates at school, my peers. Much of what I've learned, my habits, my opinions, my perception of life, was from them. I did, however, choose to believe them. Is it true that listening to them and the random bad luck I've had in my life had put me in the situation which I found myself in? I don't think so. It's for the most part a result of my own choices, my own actions, my own decisions. And I've got to take a good deal of responsibility for the way that my life, my health, my career, my finances, my home and my relationships are today. Just as the choices I have made have moulded and fashioned my life, I can also make the choice to change things now. In my future choices and decisions for tomorrow, I can either choose for my life to continue how it is, or I can make a choice to try and change it. At the very least, in the general direction which I would like my life to be going in. Being in self-isolation is a great time to take stock of things and ask ourselves questions. What do we really want from life? There are no wrong decisions. No choice in itself is wrong. It's the outcome of the choice that we may find it hard to live with. And it's fear, real or imagined, that may prevent us from making a choice. We may prefer to stay with the familiarity of past poor choices that we've made. Better the devil you know. Definitely not. I don't agree with that. Everything in life changes. Nothing stays the same. There's a sequence of losses and gains, and it brings us to the point where we find ourselves in this particular moment in time. As well as the fear of the consequences of the choices we make, and that might be a reason why we choose not to make a choice, which is kind of ironically a choice in itself. There's also the fear of commitment to a choice once it's been made. Some of the choices we make are irreversible. For example, telling our current partner that we don't want to be with them, it will certainly have consequence. And it may possibly be irreversible. We could find ourselves single. Although ultimately it has to be the right choice for us. We might decide not to make the change, and it's fear of the risk involved. Fear, which I spoke about in the first episode of this podcast, that this projection into a future that may or may not happen. We decide based on fear not to make a choice. Effectively, it's a choice for inaction. Make no mistake, we're a product of all the choices we've made, and that includes the way we behave and think. They're choices too. We must take responsibility for where we find ourselves today, and this takes humility, and it's a misunderstood concept, to look closely at your life and to admit to yourself that you're responsible for where you are today can be ego deflating if the place you find yourself in isn't a good one. And I'm not suggesting that you need to change anything in your life. All I'm saying is maybe this is a good time to have a look and take stock. This is the first step in any sort of change, and it's not a stick to beat ourselves with. It's a turning point, and it's where we say to ourselves, I'm capable of change, and then you can make the choices to try and do things differently. So that's some fundamentals about choices. Next week I shall go through an exercise with you where I'll show you how to do a thorough review of your life circumstances. But in the meantime, I want to leave you with the question that I really started out with. Who are you going to choose to be during this COVID-19 pandemic? Will you choose to panic buy toilet rolls? Will you look for people to blame for the virus? Will you play the victim role? Or will you choose to make the most of this time to examine your life and be open to the opportunities that self-isolation can present. The choice ultimately is yours. Thanks for listening to my podcast. I hope you're finding it useful. I'm certainly enjoying making them. You can find out more about my book, Diary of a Modern Consumptive, which is available from Amazon. You might find that particularly useful. And if you are watching this on YouTube, if you could subscribe to the channel, that would be fantastic. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.